The longer we can stay younger, the healthier we're going to be, the better we're going to feel, the better we're going to perform. And pace of aging is probably the number one integrator of everything. If there was one thing I could implore people to do, it would be focus on the strength of your relationships and your connections. That's going to make the biggest impact on your health span and happiness for as long as you live.
I'm your host, Erin Hunter, and today we welcome one of the leading experts in genetic testing. You may have heard him speak at our first Live Long event, or maybe you saw him consult the Kardashian clan about their biological ages on Hulu's The Kardashians. We are referring to Dr. Matthew Dawson. Dr. Dawson is the founder of Wild Health, and he is the CEO of True Diagnostic, a leading genetic company that uses the power of the genome to give people insights into their biological health so they can age in reverse. Dr. Dawson is passionate about expanding personalized and functional medicine, and he's an expert in longevity, disease prevention, and precision health. Let's please welcome Dr. Matthew Dawson. Oh, hi, Dr. Dawson. Welcome to the Live Long podcast. I wanted to jump right into it and ask you about biological age. Why should we test for it? And even like biological aging is about pacing. So why should we care about the rate at which our body's getting older versus just, how we're aging in our lives?
Yeah, so most people know their birthday, and so they know their chronologic age already. So the biologic age is important because age is the number one risk factor for every chronic disease. So obviously, people want to age slower so that they live a longer and healthier life. But it really is about disease and chronic disease. It's the number one risk factor. It's a much bigger risk factor than smoking and or drinking alcohol or being sedentary or obese. It is just the number one determinant of any disease that we may get. And so reducing that rate of aging is going to reduce your risk factor for death and every other disease. So it's a critical thing to know and then to do something about.
Why is it that the process of aging in unto itself is the ultimate determinant of our ultimate aging and getting all these diseases? How does that happen?
It is just by far the number one risk factor. So if you had a 60-year-old versus a 40-year-old, and the 40-year-old smokes and is overweight and not exercising, they're still going to have a lower risk for chronic disease than the 60-year-old. That's just how it is. And so in the past, we haven't really talked about biologic age so much. And the reason is because we didn't have good ways to measure it. But now we do. We talk about things like your cholesterol and your blood pressure and all of these markers because we had good ways to measure those. But now that we actually do have a good way to measure your pace of aging and biologic age, we're actually looking at it and trying to reduce that because it's going to be the number one thing that reduces those risks.
What does it actually look like for your body to age slower?
Yeah. So it means you stay healthier longer. That's it. We all know what it was like when we were 20 and we would have a late night or something else and how quickly we bounce back versus doing the exact same thing at 40 or 50. It's a completely different game. So the longer we can stay younger, the healthier we're going to be, the better we're going to feel, the better we're going to perform. So measure and pace of aging is probably the number one integrator of everything. So you can measure hemoglobin A1C for metabolic health, your CRP for inflammation, your triglycerides, cardiac health. But to take all of those as a whole, your pace of aging is going to be the best integrator of all those. So that's why it's such an important number to know and to follow and track over time to see if what you're doing is actually having an impact.
So you would take the test, and so you'd learn your pace of aging. Is it because do your cells tell you they're getting older? How does that look physiologically, the idea that you're aging at a certain rate?
To step back for a second, there's a lot of different kind of biological age tests. Most of them will give you a number, like what is your biologic age? That's okay. It's interesting. It's not super interesting to me as much as pace of aging. And I'll tell you why. So with biologic age, if I have someone who's 40 and their biologic age comes back at 36 or 44, you know what? I'm just going to try to optimize them either way. It's not, I'm not that interested in that. However, pace of aging, so Duke developed this test called the Dunedin pace, and they followed a big cohort of patients over decades measuring and watching them, the rates at which they age and got disease and passed away. And they found an epigenetic fingerprint of what it looks like to have increased or decreased aging. And that's what we measure now is those epigenetics and DNA methylation to get that pace of aging. The reason the pace of aging test is so useful is because it is shown to be sensitive to intervention. So you'll get a rate of aging from like zero point 0.6 to 1.4. If you're 1.0, you're aging at a normal rate. And it's been shown that if you get pregnant, that's a physiologic stress, your rate of aging goes up, and then it comes back down when you deliver. If you get COVID, have hip surgery, car accident, your rate of aging goes up, and then they come back down when you recover. Stanford did a great twin study showing if you change someone's diet from vegan to omnivore, you'll see changes in that rate of aging in just 8 weeks. So as the way that I use this with patients is we'll get that rate of aging, and then we'll do interventions that we think are going to reduce it, and then we'll measure it. And so if someone wants to change their diet in a big way, or they want to go get IV stem cells, and that's expensive, it's $40,000 in Panama or something, well, we'll measure a pace of aging before, do the intervention, and then measure again in 2 to 3 months and see if it had the effect that we wanted. So we use it to measure interventions over time and optimize someone's lifestyle.
Something that I find interesting about measuring the pace of aging is that pace is a dynamic thing. It happens over time. Yet you found these biomarkers in the body that show you something that's dynamic, yet it's a static thing
Mhm.
in the sense that it's that one marker.
That's a good point, and it's a good point about the difference in pace of age and a biologic age number too. So one thing I didn't mention, if I get that number back and your biologic age is, say, 42, but you're chronologically 40, well, it could be that you're doing everything really well right now, but in your 20s, you're doing a lot of things really wrong. So you may have done damage then, and you're really nailing it now. And I can't tell if the reason you're a little bit older biologically is because of the past or what's going on now. The nice thing about the pace of aging is it's showing what's going on right now. That's another reason why it's a better marker in my mind than just biologic age.
Wow. Okay. So, kind of on that note, you mentioned the twin study that came out of Stanford. Alongside those findings, which was looking at different diets, what are some of the different facets of a lifestyle that contribute to this pace of aging that you found are more strong?
Yeah, so there's a lot. So we've looked at a lot of studies. And Yale has done a lot of studies on this, seeing what interventions affect biologic age the most. So there's things that obviously we know, like not smoking, limiting alcohol use, getting really good sleep, stress reduction, and nutrition, and exercise. Exercise is a really big one as well. The stress reduction is the one that has been, I think people are it has such a big impact, people don't think about it as much, but it's those normal things that we would think. And then there are some things like, nutrition, that's a generic word, what does that mean? Well, that's where some of this testing can come in, like in that Stanford study, is a twin study, and they had people do omnivore versus vegan diet and switch back and forth, and different people respond to nutrition or other interventions differently. So finding the perfect nutrition or diet for you, that's where something like a pace test can come in handy. Switch back and forth. Try the ketogenic diet, try a vegan diet, try an omnivore diet, and see which one works the best for you.
So, within the pace of aging, you said it's an integrative measurement, right? So, it's combines all these different biomarkers like cholesterol and what have you that contribute to aging. How do you know, let's say with your personal health, if something is healthy for you in one respect, but maybe it's actually not good for you in another? Because, oh, here, for instance, diet, super controversial. For some people, it could be really healthy, but others say, oh my goodness, it's very bad for cholesterol or your heart, like the American Heart Study. Does the pace of aging and being able to calculate that tell you how it affects different types of markers?
Right. So no, not just the pace of aging. So I founded a company called Wild Health that does precision medicine. And so what you're describing, we frequently will test someone's DNA, their genetics, their blood work, collect millions of data points, and then figure out what is the right diet for them. So we can kind of dial that in based on kind of risk factors and DNA. The pace of aging test won't give you that. It'll give you just the pace right now. Then you would need to do some other things, like other testing to figure out what diet to try. And then the pace is how you could kind of confirm, like, okay, this is working just to lower our rate of aging. There are a couple other biologic age tests, though, that can give you more specific information. So at True Diagnostic, we have a true age report, and that gives three different ages. So an ohmic M age, this was developed by Harvard, and it's the best test at predicting your chance of mortality, like how long till you're gonna die. The PACE test, which we've been talking about that Duke developed for that rate of aging, and then one developed by Yale called the Symphony Age. And that tells all different organ systems. So it tells a liver age, a kidney age, a brain age, a heart age. And by getting that as well, you can see your pace of aging, but then you can see which organ system potentially is having a harder time and that you really need to focus on kind of what's the weak link. So you get more specific information from that Symphony Age test.
It really, and this is what strikes me every single time I talk to an expert within longevity. There's so many different things that go into health. We used to think it's so linear, but everything tells you something about the whole. You've met a ton of people who have done the true diagnostic tests, all the above you listed. Are there, if you just had to list three different biomarkers that stand out as critical things that we should be focusing on for our health, what have you noticed are those more critical things to look at that determine ultimately your aging?
Sure. So, yeah, so if you want to talk about kind of three traditional biomarkers, what I would say is some very common ones that are easy for people to get is an ApoB. So that would be kind of the one marker when it comes to your cholesterol markers. There's a lot of different cholesterol markers. That would be the one to look at and try to optimize if you're going to pick one from there. We know that metabolic, and that has to do with your cardiovascular health, and cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of Americans. The next would be one related to metabolic health, which is critically important. Metabolic health uh, is a big factor in every chronic disease risk, your cancer, dementia, heart attack, stroke, all of these things. And so hemoglobin A1C, measure that. And then the third one, if I had to pick, would be a measure of inflammation. So just CRP and following that. If you really optimize those three, ApoB, CRP, and hemoglobin A1C, then you're doing a lot. You're going a long way in optimizing your health and health span.
Certainly not the first person who's said that, metabolic health is so important. But what is it about the metabolism that actually is such a critical factor for healthy aging?
Yeah. It so it affects every organ system. If you have poor metabolic health, it's going to affect everything, your brain, heart, liver, kidneys, just everything. So we want to optimize that. We want your hemoglobin A1C to be as low as possible in general. And so we just know that drives cancer, heart attack, stroke, dementia, all of these things are affected by that. So optimizing that is just a critical one to optimize. There's other things that aren't easily measured by biomarkers, blood biomarkers, but you could call them biomarkers that are big integrators as well. Those things like VO2 max, grip strength, um, your sleep. I mean, you can get biomarkers related to your sleep just from your wearables also, but the blood biomarkers would be those three.
Are there certain specific targeted interventions that you've historically used to help people with these three important biomarkers that contribute to aging?
For sure. If you think about ApoB, that's going to be dietary related. There's a few ways to attack that. One, dietary related, depending on the person and their genetics, it may be reducing saturated fat, for example, but it just depends on their sensitivity to that. Obviously, there are plenty of molecules as well, medications for that. They're quite effective with less side effects today than what we had even 5 to 10 years ago. When it comes to hemoglobin A1C, it's quite simple. Fasting is really important for that. Just reducing refined carbohydrates is very important. And then CRP and inflammation. In general, there are certain foods and activities and things that can be inflammatory. Some of that will be genetic. So, like I mentioned at Wild Health, we'll test people's DNA, and we may find someone has an SH2B3 polymorphism. That means that wheat and gluten would be very inflammatory for them. If they had an MCM6 polymorphism, then dairy would be very inflammatory. So we'll test and see what could be inflammatory to reduce that, but then also just eliminating some of those things if you don't have a genetic test, just eliminating them and seeing how your inflammatory markers improve is good. And then there's things, basic things that we know, regular exercise, regular sleep, those things tend to decrease chronic inflammation as well.
So that's really interesting because let's say you took a test for celiac disease and you didn't have it, but you're saying it's very possible, though, it could be causing inflammation in you, but a normal practitioner probably wouldn't catch that because the test didn't say, "Oh, you don't have celiac, you're all good."
Yeah, that's right. So there's a threshold and a certain amount of severity that celiac disease that you need to have for that to test positive. But I see people frequently who don't have celiac disease, and they don't really feel bad if they eat wheat and gluten. But we find this marker, and sure enough, when we take that out of their diet, their inflammatory markers get better, and they just do feel better then as well. So it wasn't to the level that it was celiac disease, but it certainly was having an effect on just kind of their global inflammation.
So, similarly, as someone who practices functional medicine, what are some of the common things that you see in Western doctors' practices that maybe aren't as effective today for helping people age gracefully or promote longevity as you've seen functional medicine do? And what does that look like? What does the way you see it compare to the way they see it?
Yeah, so traditional medicine just that's not the goal. The goal isn't to maximize health span and longevity. The goal is to treat disease. So it's um and so I can't really fault traditional medicine for not doing a good job of that because it's not the goal. It's not how it's designed. They don't really have anything for you unless you have a disease and a diagnosis. Whereas with functional medicine and the way that I practice in precision medicine, we're really trying to optimize and prevent. And so we're really not thinking about, do you have a disease right now that we need to treat? If you do, we'll treat it. That's great. We're thinking about what you're going to get in 20 years or 30 years from now. How we're going to prevent you from getting something there, and how do we optimize you? So it's just a very different mindset and paradigm in general. And so traditional medicine doesn't do a good job of maximizing health span and thinking about longevity because that's not what it's designed to do.
So fundamentally, it's just the framework isn't there.
Yeah, the incentive structure, everything else, like you can't if you're a physician can't so insurance isn't going to pay for a lot of the tests that like the genetic test or the epigenetic test or the deeper dive into the blood work. They're not going to pay for that unless you have an indication, which is a medical diagnosis or a disease. And so, yeah, it just doesn't support that type of thinking.
Where do you see the future of precision medicine and genetic testing going? Like, what's the potential?
Yeah, the potential is incredible and it's moving very fast. So I see a couple of things. Number one, precision medicine in general, like we have the ability now to test all of these things and bring it all together the genetics, the epigenetics, the blood work, microbiome, pull in wearables, and make really precise recommendations to optimize people. Like, what is their perfect diet for them based on all of those markers? Like, someone may have a VDR SNP, meaning they need more vitamin D, but then what is their vitamin D level? And do they live in Alaska in the winter or are they in Florida in the summer? So all of those factors coming together to give a recommendation around just going outside or eating more foods with vitamin D, like shiitake mushrooms, or taking a vitamin D supplement. So the future is bringing all of that data together to make recommendations and not give one size fits all recommendations. Like everyone should take this supplement or everyone should not. Everyone should have this diet versus not. So the future is gathering all of that data and then delivering the precision recommendations with AI. We just recently developed an AI app called Hollis that does that, that can take all of that data and it's built on top of a large language model so that you can actually interact with it. So just like you could ask ChatGPT, give me a 7-day meal plan, well, you could ask Hollis, give me a 7-day meal plan, and it'll give it to you based on your DNA, your blood work, and all of those things. I was just speaking at a conference in DC last weekend, and I said, what should I have for lunch today? I was interacting with it, and it gave me an exact meal from a restaurant zero point 0.1 miles away that was tailored to my DNA, knowing my ApoB and my A1C. It knew that I'd swam that morning and went for a run, so it was the perfect meal for recovery for me. And that I think is the future of medicine, combining AI, large language models with precision medicine.
2 questions. Did you get that meal? And did was it good? What was it?
Yeah. It's funny, I did because I was running late, and I ended up not doing it because I had to speak, soon after that. I had my times mixed up, and I had to go, do a mic checking thing, so I didn't get the meal, unfortunately.
You missed out on the AI recommendation. Oh my
Nice
gosh.
thing is
Oh no.
on my app, and it's always there for me, so I could do it for the next meal and the next, and so
Crazy though, the fact that all this data is coming together in order to understand not only who you are, but where you are and what your environment, how your health interacts with your environment you're currently in.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly right, and be able to track all of it, like in this app, you can upload all of your everything that you're eating, and so it's tracking all your macros and everything as well, and it's already pulling in from all of your wearables. We all have Apple Watches or Whoops or Auras or Fitbits or all these things. So it's just pulling and collecting all that data constantly to be able to give better recommendations, and it tracks all the labs and the genetics and the epigenetics as well. So being able to track all of that to give not just the right recommendation for a person, but the right recommendation for a person in the location they are at that time based on how they slept last night and all of that data.
Is it accurate? Like, to a certain degree, or because it's so new, what are some of the hurdles we have to overcome in order to make this even more widely accessible to people? Because it's pretty novel, isn't it?
It is, yeah, but it is accurate. Anyone who's interacted with, the newest versions of the large language models can see that they're very accurate. They're not perfect, but they are much better than I mean, I trust it infinitely more than I trust a human brain. There's no doctor or health coach that I trust to have all of my DNA memorized and all of my
Uh,
lab work memorized and to be in my pocket at 2 a.m. when I have a question. So is it perfect? Nothing is perfect, but it's a big improvement over I think where we have been in the past.
so, how do you think then that AI with functional medicine and precision medicine, how do you think it all will contribute to the trajectory of where the country is going in terms of chronic diseases and our ability to either treat or prevent it? Is there one that maybe it's better for?
It's gonna be better for both. I mean, it's, both. In treating, I mean, there are multiple studies showing that, large language models are better at making diagnosis than physicians are. You give them all the information, and they're just better. They have all the information at their fingertips. And then prevention too. I mean, to know all of someone's DNA like ours does, know the risk factors, you just kind of seeing ahead. I mean, we had a patient recently at Wild Health who, very healthy, mid-40s, former athlete, just joined because they just wanted to optimize that last little bit, the last couple percent. No medical problems or diseases, but genetically we picked up really high cardiovascular risk, heart risk. The blood biomarkers picked up some interesting things related to that, and the wearables pulled in some interesting stuff around HRV and resting heart rate. And all of it put together, the AI made a recommendation. Hey, you really need to go deeper on heart health. So we ordered an AI guided CT scan, and we got an emergency call from the radiologist saying, "Hey, this person needs to go to the cath lab immediately." They had a near complete blockage of their LAD, which is called the widowmaker, and they got a cath. And if they had not had this person probably would have died of the heart attack in the next year or two. But because of this, the AI being able to identify this person is going to live 20 plus more years probably because they're going to be treated and we know about it. So the prevention piece is going to be incredible. The diagnosis piece as well. I think there's going to be a fair amount of time before people completely trust this, but I think it's not really about trusting AI more than a doctor or a doctor more than AI. It's going to be the combination of the two. It's going to be combining the two. Just like in chess, it's not the best player in the world isn't AI or a human. It's a combination when you bring the two together and let the humans do what they're good at and the AI do what's good at. I think that's where medicine is going, where we're going to see the big improvements.
That's a very powerful thing to find that you think you're healthy and then, oh my goodness, you had a life-changing thing happening and you wouldn't have even known, but this was able to help. That's really fascinating, and all this certainly sounds like it's going to contribute to much longer lives in people's, but not only that, it's people And correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like this is all meant for people to understand their bodies better, though, because it's also you're putting that knowledge in your own hands and you're able to do something about it when you have it.
Yeah, it's about empowering people. I mean, in the past, 5 years ago, 5 or 10 years, we couldn't even get this data. Now we can get it, but the issue we have is like, what do you do with it? When you do sequence your DNA, when you do all these testing, like, how do you make sense of it and bring it all together? And that's the really cool thing now is the AI and LLMs are able to do that, to kind of bring that together and and empower both the physicians who are using it and the individuals who are putting it in their hands as well.
Despite all this high level, amazing stuff happening, I was wondering if you could share with people, even though we are all for individualization and precision medicine, what are some general things we can start doing right now just to optimize our health a little bit better? Just those nuggets that we can take to our daily lives.
Yeah, so I could talk about things that everyone knows, like exercising more, eating better, eating whole foods, getting optimal sleep. But what I would like to maybe end with is I think the most important thing is there's a great study by Harvard on just healthy aging. They looked, it was over decades, a big study. What is the most important thing for your health span? And this isn't talked about enough, but it was very clear. It wasn't smoking or alcohol or exercise. It was the strength of your social relationships and connection to others. And we don't focus on that. And I think that's the one word. And I would expand that definition of connection to yourself, connection to nature, connection to your food, connection to your body, and connection to others. That in their this Harvard study, they showed that had a bigger impact your social relationships than smoking. And we know smoking reduces your life by a decade. So it added more than a decade. So we've lost that in the age of social media and remote work and so many things that are going on. But if there was one thing I could implore people to do, it'd be focus on the strength of your relationships and your connections. That's going to make the biggest impact on your health span and happiness for as long as you live.
What do you do for your connection? How have you learned to grow that in your own life?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I am try to be an efficient person, and so I stack connections. So what I mean by that, for example, frequently I'll start our business. I'm the CEO of a company, and so I'll have people out to my property. I live on a couple hundred acres in the woods, and so we'll start days sometimes by rucking in the woods together, and we even will forage some there. So what this is fostering a connection to nature. We're in nature, to other people, to the team members, to my body. I'm rucking. I'm usually carrying 70 pounds to food as we're foraging. So I'm kind of stacking all of those connections at once. And so that's just kind of one example of how I would go about that.
So, the note from this conversation is rock with people and your life will be better.
Ruck with people in the woods. Yeah.
Rock with people in the woods.
And that,
Oh, that's no, that's wonderful though, because what you're touching on here is the idea that everything's not black and white. Social connection doesn't just mean, okay, I'm going to meet my friends at a bar. You could be active and get work done and go get good food. And,
yeah.
connection can be versatile.
Yeah, and we're planning the day, we're getting things done, we're being efficient. And then also the beautiful thing about the rucking is some people won't carry any weight. Some people may carry 70 to 100 pounds and everybody kind of, so it's kind of an individualized thing, but they're also doing it together. So it's something we found that's really nice and helpful.
That's so lovely. Thank you for sharing. That thank you so much for your time, and this was a pleasure, and I'm very happy that you care and you have a well-rounded perspective on all of this, and it's really the future's exciting.
For sure. And if anyone is interested in the biologic age test, I think we have a link for a discount for those, and it's at truediagnostic.com is where you can get those tests. And also mentioned Wild Health, wildhealth.com if someone is interested in that healthcare as well. We'd love to help everyone that we can maximize their health span and feel as good as they can right now.
One rock at a time.
Exactly.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson.
Thank you.
Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified healthcare professional before starting any exercise, wellness, or health program. Our content, products, and services are not substitutes for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.